We are live.
Hey everybody, I'm Sumantrak. I'm a sophomore and the AI ML team lead at Bitsasium. So today's session will be on AI and ML. So this is my Twitter and my GitHub. You can check me out. I'm the AI consultant at a startup called Employee Outlook. So I use AI libraries on a daily basis to make applications which are integrated into a larger code base. I've worked on projects in computer vision, which use both the traditional approach of computer vision and deep learning methods. I've also worked on a few projects in natural language processing, mostly for sentiment analysis. But lately, I've also been working on a chatbot and a few toy projects in reinforcement learning. So that's about me. Let's get started. Okay, so what's machine learning? So many a times this question has been asked, and yet we ask this question again. So I'll tell you what machine learning is. It's basically deriving insights from real world data. So what machine learning attempts to do is it tries to create a model of the real world. So we are always keen on knowing what will be the outcome if we take an action in the real world. For example, if I invest in a stock in the real world, will the stock price go up or will the stock price go down? But my money is valuable to me and I can't really afford to invest in a stock price without any idea or information about the stock price. So what we can do instead is use machine learning to create a bot which replicates how the real world stock market works and try to invest money in that to see how it works. So these are areas where machine learning comes in handy. So a core idea of machine learning, or rather deep learning, is a neural net. And what's so special about a neural net? So humans have always tried to model the real world. So physics is an attempt to model the real world. We create equations and mathematical estimations to show what happens if we throw a ball, or basically we try to mimic the real world using mathematics. So in that approach, we take a very specific problem and create the solution only for that problem. A neural network is a bit different. A neural network is a universal estimator. It isn't geared towards a very specific problem. A neural network is designed in such a fashion that it is able to solve any problem. So a neural network, which is used in natural language processing, can also be used in a computer vision application or in a reinforcement learning application. And that's the beauty of a neural network. So I won't be going into details of how backpropagation works and how the neural network adjusts its weights and all in this talk. I'll be talking about the overall idea of AI and ML. So what does a neural network actually do? So a neural network will take input and it will try to model itself in such a way to produce a desired output. So we know the output and we also know the input. Now we have to, so think of weights and biases as knobs. We try to adjust the knobs in such a way that for a given input, we'll get the desired output. So we try to learn the function in between. So a key element of a neural net is it acts like a black box. It derives patterns inside the data of the input and produces the output, but we do not really know what the patterns are. So a key area in machine learning research today is interpretable AI. People try to interpret how a machine is really learning. So you might ask, why do we need machine learning? Why can't we solve some problems traditionally? So to answer your question, let's take the example of computer vision. So for example, we want to model a neural net. We want to model an application to recognize a cat. So we could give it very specific features. So a cat would have 2 ears, 2 eyes, a nose, and it would look a certain way. We could like go in great detail and describe a cat. However, there would be one instance where the cat would be in a different kind of a lighting or in a different position where our application will fail. There are always some edge cases where normal traditional approaches fail. Or even, for example, in a chatbot, you can create a graphical tree with pre-decided responses for questions and keep answering the questions, but that will also fail at some point. So that is the reason we need something like ML, which can understand what the meaning of language is or what a cat actually represents. And based on that, it is able to classify or answer your questions. So that is about machine learning. So let's talk about ML algorithms. So you'll encounter a few different types of ML algorithms. So there is something called supervised learning, there is unsupervised learning, there is semi-supervised learning, and there is reinforcement learning. So what is supervised learning? So supervised learning is where you have labeled data. So let me take an example. For example, you're trying to create a model which can distinguish between cats and dogs. All right. So you will have a human label a lot of cats and also label a lot of dogs. You will feed the images of cats and dogs into the machine, and you'll get labels out of the machine, and you'll compare it with the human labels. If it matches with the human labels, it's performing well. If it is not matching with the human labels, it needs to train itself. So the human is guiding the entire process over here. So in supervised learning, the machine is trying to exactly mimic human behavior. So the example I took is a classification example where it is trying to classify between two different classes. There can be multiple classes. There is another kind of supervised learning, which is a regression problem. So you'll be trying to predict a number, or for example, a housing price, or for example, the value, for example, housing price based on certain parameters, where the location of the house, the size of the house, the number of bedrooms it's got. So human will assign a certain price to the value. Seeing the pattern in seeing the pattern of how humans price their houses, the machine will learn to give a appropriate price to the house based on the location and the different attributes of that. What is unsupervised learning? Unsupervised learning is where you have the input data, but you don't really have labels for the data. So what can we really do here? What we can do is we can cluster the data together. We can group different chunks of data together. So for example, let's take the example of music. So jazz music sounds a certain way, whereas hip hop sounds a certain way. So hip hop track would be closer in representation to another hip hop track than to a jazz track. And yeah, and similarly, a jazz track would be closer to its own subset than to the hip hop track. So it will create different clusters of data, and based on that, it will, in some sense, organize the data and return it to us. So that is unsupervised learning for us. Semi-supervised learning comes midway between supervised and unsupervised learning. So I like to think of semi-supervised learning as unsupervised learning with some constraints. So basically, if you can see my mouse pointer over here, so you have got a human label for this data point, and you've got a human label for this data point. So just based on these two data points, the machine is able to create a line which is able to separate the two of them. What happens in semi-supervised learning is we get additional data points. And based on these additional data points, the machine is able to cluster them together and create a line in between separating these two data points. Now, all these data points will belong to the black class, and all these data points will belong to the white class. So there is minimal interference of human beings involved here. So the human beings have not labeled all the data. They have just labeled one point in this cluster and one point in another cluster. And in this way, the machine is able to learn without a lot of supervision. So you need to understand that labeling data is costly. It requires a lot of human effort. You will need to sit down and classify which is a cat, which is a dog, and problems get more complex. So semi-supervised learning is kind of helpful in that fashion. Now let's talk about reinforcement learning. So what is reinforcement learning? So we basically have an environment, and the model tries to understand the environment, how the environment functions around it. And it sees the world as a game. And in the game, we have positive points and negative points. So if it performs a certain action, it will get positive returns. If it performs another action, it will get negative returns. There is also a case where it can initially get negative returns, but in the long run get positive returns. So the objective of the machine is to solve the game in such a way that it is able to get the maximum returns. So reinforcement learning has two problems. First of all, it has to understand the environment. It has to realize which actions lead to positive returns and which actions lead to negative returns. So that is designing the environment, understanding the environment. Then it has to decide on a policy. And based on the policy, it has to navigate the world in such a way that it gets the maximum returns from the world, maximum positive returns from the world. So that is reinforcement learning. Moving on to the next slide. So machine learning is kind of diverse and is a huge field, and there is no way I can cover all the subsections of machine learning today itself. That will require you multiple courses and multiple articles. You'll have to read papers. What I can do is talk about the use cases of machine learning in different companies. So today I take the example of Spotify. So what is so great about Spotify? Why do we all love Spotify? Why are users migrating from different apps to Spotify? So the reason we all love Spotify is because Spotify refines our music taste. Spotify will give you great recommendations. It will give you music you have never heard before, but which the music you'll also like. And it is actually a very interesting problem. How is it able to give you new kind of music which is not similar to the music which is similar to the music you have heard before, not exactly the same, so that you keep exploring new genres? So that is a problem Spotify tries to tackle. So what Spotify does is it tries to use deep learning to automate the process of identifying latent patterns between artists, genres, and user preferences. So this might sound like a lot of jargon to you right now, but I'll explain it as I move along the slides. So the model in Spotify use collaborative filtering. So basically what it tries to do is it uses the nearest neighbor approach, K nearest neighbor approach. So for example, you like a song, it will create a representation for all the songs in the world, and it will put songs which are similar close to one another, and songs which are not alike far away from each other. So for example, you like a song A and song B, C, D are very the closest songs to the song A, then it will basically recommend song A, B, C to you. This is one approach which Spotify uses. Then it also uses natural language processing and audio models. So let's move on and see how it does that. Uh, Sorry for the glitch. Wait a minute. I'm sorry for this. Okay. Yeah. So I'll just read from here. So this is collaborating filtering. So it tries to locate the nearest neighbors to make predictions. So Spotify uses implicit feedback signals, number of times a song is streamed, for example. So, for example, you might say that you like the Beatles a lot, but when we go to your Spotify playlist, we find that you play Hindi Bollywood songs a lot. We cannot really trust humans on the kind of feedback they give. So the best way to deal with this is to see their usage patterns rather than seeing what they respond. So for example, if you ask a human what they like, they might respond the Beatles, but in reality they listen to Bollywood songs a lot, and they would be happier if more Bollywood songs were recommended to them. So we try to so Spotify tries to predict track the number of times a song is streamed, and based on that it collects metadata for that song and tries to recommend the song to the user. So in Spotify, each user has his own profile, and attached to that is a lot of metadata. So for example, what they listen to, when they listen to it. So for example, you like to listen to some songs in the morning and some songs you in the evening when you are very tired, and how often do you listen to a certain song, and so on. So for exploration, Spotify uses the bandit policy. So the bandit policy is a reinforcement learning methodology. So basically, it has to decide between exploration and exploitation. So Spotify knows for sure that you like some bands, but it also knows that it cannot keep recommending the same band to you over and over again, because it will get monotonous. It wants to recommend new genres to you. So it has to decide when it wants to exploit the policy. It wants to give the band for it, it knows you like for sure, and when it will give a new band and take a risk. So that is the bandit policy. So it decides the profile, your profile, based on a set of features. Now the question is, who decides the features? So hopefully this will work. No, it won't. Okay, so NLP features. So using NLP to cut across genres. Spotify's NLP algorithm identifies the co-location of individual terms and uses this to predict the meaning of the phrases. So basically, a song has got a lot of lyrics, right? And the lyrics mean something. So based on the lyrics, the Spotify algorithm tries to understand the meaning of the song and assign an adjective to it. Now, for example, a song might be labeled as sad, moody, or dark. And based on these adjectives, Spotify is able to predict what kind of song you will like. So, for example, you like moody songs a lot or dark songs a lot. So this cuts across genres or traditional genres, for example, jazz or rock. So you might like a song which is dark in jazz and also a song which is dark in rock. So it can it can like recommend new genres to you. So this enables us to search songs for moods and discover new songs. Audio models. So in audio models, it tries to locate the nearest neighbor to make predictions. If a new artist adds a song, he has a very small following, and the collaborative filtering method does not permit us to recommend the artist. We need more features. So, for example, you are a new artist who has joined Spotify. You do not have a lot of following, and people cannot really know what bracket you fall in. So, for example, when Anuv Jain joined Spotify, he was a virtually unknown artist. So, basically, what Spotify did was it analyzed his tracks, and based on his tracks, they tried to predict the key, the tempo, the loudness of his songs, and try to predict similar songs, his songs, which are similar. Try to find similar songs and recommend his songs based on that similarity. So as users start listening to his songs, the model will get more data, and these additional data points can be added as metadata to the song, and then the predictions will get better and better as Spotify keeps adding data to the song. So computer vision. Computer vision is teaching machines to see. One of the primary ways humans interact with the world is through vision. But how do we really see? Teaching machines to see is a tremendous task. So vision is very complicated. It involves tracking an object, separating the object from its background, estimating human pose, tracking the movement of an object. So these are all very complex features in computer vision. Reading text, for example. So these are all the things that you can do in computer vision. So it would obviously be take a lot of time to go in depth and explain all these features. But what I will do instead is I will talk about a company called Vitriver. So okay, I hope this can be presented. No. So Vitriver is a company which is trying to make media searchable. So how does Vitriver approach the problem? Basically, what it does is it annotates its entire data set or its entire multimedia library with tags, making it easily searchable. It identifies scenes, it reads texts and images, it identifies human poses and different settings. So, for example, you have a video stream, and in that video stream, you see a sunset, you see a garden. It will keep adding textual data to the clip as it keeps progressing. So having annotated the entire clip, it will add metadata such as it has got a scenery, it has got a garden, it has got this, that. And so when a person is looking for a clip with a sunset, or a person is looking for a clip with a canyon or roses, it will be easily searchable. So this involves a lot of computer vision. So for example, identifying human poses is a complex task. We need to try to identify what a human is trying to do. So where can it have what applications can this have? So for example, you can control your data using different poses. For example, I make this gesture on my arm and it opens a Chrome tab. So we make the human machine interface more easy to use, and that is how computer vision can be used. So knowing machine learning does not really make you a software engineer. To actually make products which are usable by other people, you need to know computer science, you need to be aware of the subject matter, and you need to know a little bit of maths and statistics. So the unicorn you see is the ideal case. So the ML pipeline. How to design your ML pipeline. So basically, you'll be collecting data from different sources. You will load your data from a file, which will probably be a comma separated value or JSON file to your pipeline. Split it during transforming. You will split it into training data and testing data. Now you'll transform the data to fit a format. So, okay, I'll explain what this means. So for example, you have a model which takes in 10 words as input and produces an output. But in the input, you have got only 3 words. Now, this input will fail when you try to push it into your neural network. So what you will do instead is you will pad 3 words or 4 words with additional words on both sides and then pass it to your network. In that way, the 3 words would easily pass to your network and also produce an output. So next we talk about offline versus online model training, model evaluation, tuning hyperparameters, and model deployment. We'll talk about all of these in the upcoming slides. So how do you want your ML pipeline to be? How to design your ML pipeline so that it is very user friendly? So your idea should be to reduce latency. It should be integrated but loosely coupled with other parts of the system. Your ML pipeline should be scalable, both horizontally and vertically. So if you attended the previous talks, you know what horizontal scaling and vertical scaling means, but I'll still give you a brief description. So for example, the organization you're working for grows in scale. It has more users. So basically they will be adding more computers or more servers to their hardware. And so your machine learning model should be able to handle that. It should be able to utilize its resources well. Your machine learning pipeline should be message driven. It should have workload management. It should be fault tolerant because the real world is full of faults. There are cases where you'll face a problem and your model will crash. It should be able to correct itself and be back on track. And it should have batch and real-time processing. So how to design your ML pipeline? First, you have to define a problem. Then is the phase of data ingestion. It will take in data. Then there is data preparation, there's data segregation, then model training, candidate model evaluation, and model deployment. And then finally, there's performance monitoring. So this is the ML pipeline. So I'll explain this to you using raw.io. So yeah. So basically, it will have, wait. Yep. I'm sorry. Yeah. Okay. So you have data coming in over from here. This is, for example, your stream data. So over here, you will do some feature engineering. I'll talk about what is feature engineering. Then this is data you collected previously, historical data. Then you will have feature engineering over here again. Then there is the training step. And wait. Yeah, just a minute. Yeah, so this is the training step. And this is your deployed model. And finally, you will scale your model. So basically, you have to accommodate for real-time decision making, features and predictions are time sensitive. So basically here is real world data coming in, okay? And you're finding features in the real world data. You're passing those features into your deployed model, and you're getting results over here, which you're passing to the end user. So it also uses offline data. So for example, let's take the example of Uber. Okay, so Uber is trying to predict when your cab is going to arrive. So it has the data of your location, your driver's location, and the traffic in between. So based on these data, it tries to find out some features in those data and passes those features to the deployed model, and it gets output. But it also uses historical data. So for example, it knows what kind of traffic yields what kind of what kind of time it takes in what kind of traffic. It will take previous experiences and combine those features in the deployed model to finally give you the output. So this is the initial ML pipeline. So first of all, we start with data ingestion. So we funnel incoming data into a data store. So basically what we are doing is, yeah, we have incoming data. And we store that incoming data as it is in a database. So we do not do any transformations in the data. We just directly store the incoming data into a database. So the data we store will be in multiple formats, and because of which we will not be able to use the structured query language. We can have like additional features in one kind of data. So for example, a data, let's take an example. So some data might have height and weight, whereas other data might not have height and weight in it. Or some data might add a new feature to the data, height, weight, and for example, gender. So in an SQL database, you're constrained by the table or the structure of the table. So for example, you have height, weight, and gender. You won't be able to add new features in an SQL database. So that is why you prefer a non-SQL, no SQL database, where you're able to store the data as it comes, raw, without any transformations. So the ingestion service is done in this way. So there is, for example, if you can see, there is source 1, source 2, and source 3. All the sources get combined into the stream engine, and then they are directly stored into the data store. And so this is in online service. This is an offline service. So there is a dedicated pipeline for each data set. So dedicated pipeline meaning this is one dedicated pipeline. This is another dedicated pipeline for source A, source B, and source C. Now, even within this pipeline, the task is broken down into multiple tasks. Why do we do this? So for example, your computer has multiple cores. You have an octa-core processor, or you have multiple processors. You do not want any of those processors to be lying idle. So you divide your data into multiple sets and you parallelize the process, and all of the processes happen at once. And finally, it is aggregated and pushed into the database. So that is how it works. It works on the pub and sub model. So pub and sub model is nothing. Basically, it is alerted that the data is being streamed into the model. You need to ingest the data, and as soon as it gets the message, it starts intaking the data. So in the online layer, what happens is you do not wait for the model. So basically, you do not store the data. You also pass the data to your feature extraction model and your deployed model. In that way, your real-time data can be used for processing. Next is data preparation. So data comes in multiple formats. So basically, we need to format the differences. We need to spot the outliers. If a trend is incorrect or there is missing and skewed data, we need to correct that. And we need to rectify anomalies, basically. So for example, we know that a person's height cannot be 10 feet or 12 feet. So basically that is an outlier. We'll remove that data from our data set. So there is a lot of data cleaning involved. And then we also try to format our data in a way that it can be fit into our neural net. Next, we generate features from our data based on the abstract behavior. So as I was gave the example of Spotify, you remember how they found out features in the data, and then we transform those features. I also talked about transforming features. Then we select the most relevant features for training. So this can be left to the caller or can be automated with something like a chi-square test. So for example, the caller or the caller function can ask for certain features. So that can be done. Or we as like the data preparation stage itself can automate the process by a chi-square test. So what it will do is it will take a feature, see the how much the feature affects the final output. So more the feature affects the final output, the more important it is. So we can automate the process using a chi-square test. So okay, so there is also an offline stage to this. So this is triggered by the completion of data ingestion. So it saves the generated features. So a lot of features are generated as we saw, and multiple features from different data sets can be combined. And then the features are copied to the online data preparation service. So the online data preparation service is basically for applications which require like real-time processing. Then we come to the part of data segregation. So data segregation is relatively simple, and it does not require a separate pipeline in general, but it's required to have an API to solve this. So basically you split your data into a training data set and testing data set. So for example, 70% training and 30% testing. So you can either do this sequentially, or you can put a random seed to choose a 70% randomly and 30% randomly. So whatever be the case, you need to shuffle your records first. So this is done. Then basically your API should also have you should have the liberty to inject a random data seed and a random seed or a ratio for testing and training. You can input into your API. So you can specify that I want my API to separate it into 60% and 40% respectively. And you can specify that I want the random seed to be 3 or 4. So a random seed basically produces reproducibility. So for example, if you got an accuracy of 90% with random seed 3 for a particular data set, every time you use the same model with the same data set with the same random seed, you'll get the same accuracy. So that is one of the reasons you should have the liberty to choose your random seed. Then finally comes the process of model training. So model training cannot happen online. This process has to happen when the model is not in use. This will happen offline during the non-peak hours. So for example, when Uber is not being used by a lot of people, it can take its service down and train its model. Though this process is time and event triggered. So it consists of a library of training model algorithms. So for example, something as simple as a binary classification has so many possibilities of solving. We have so many possibilities of solving binary classification. So what we do is we test all the possibilities. For example, we have 10 possibilities of 10 ways of solving binary classification. We will train all the 10 methods of solving binary classification, and whichever model performs best, we will use that in deployment. So how does this help? So the thing with ML is a very dynamic field, and we are getting new models all the time. And since we are getting new models all the time, if we cannot if the model is not modular, if we do not have the liberty to add a new model and remove a new model, then our model will become very rigid and will soon get outdated. So this gives us provision for continuous development of new model types and also making them interchangeable. So okay, so how do we actually do the training? So there are multiple approaches. One approach is we have a dedicated pipeline for each model. So you have 5 different servers training 5 different models. So that is one method. Or you can do the training step by step, or you can parallelize the training data. So you have the same model loaded on your 5 servers. You distribute your data into 5 different parts and train the data. So that is something which can be done. Or you can parallelize the model itself. You can your model has got a lot of weights. So as I told, knobs. So the knobs are weights and biases. You can distribute the weights between 2 servers. So you take the first 5 weights and you train on them. I'll take the next 5 weights and I'll train on them. So that way you can parallelize the model itself. or you can take a hybrid approach. So these are multiple ways of dealing with model training. Now, the funny thing with real world data is you should always be saving data checkpoints, because your model can crash at any point and you cannot afford to lose the saved weights. So basically, if your model runs out of like it crashes or some event occurs, you should be able to revert back to your latest checkpoint and again start training from there. So this is the model training phase. Then there's the candidate model evaluation. So this process is also offline. So we have trained for 4 or 5 models, and based on those 4 or 5 models, we see which model is performing best, which model is giving us the results we actually want. So based on that, we can choose our model and then finally deploy it. Yeah. So after that, there is the steps of hyperparameter tuning, regularization, etc. And then it is fine. After all of it is done, the notification service broadcasts that the best model is ready for deployment, and the model is ready to be used the next day. So this is model deployment. So mostly you guys will be writing your models in Jupyter notebooks, right? But you cannot really use Jupyter notebooks for in real world applications. You need to convert it into such a manner that you'll be able to integrate it into a larger code base. So what you will do is you'll write a Python file with a class, and basically call that class into a Flask application. I'm just giving you a very simple example. Now, what this Flask will do is it will create an app around it, which follows the REST API. And based on that, it will basically, using REST API, different parts of the code base will be able to call your model. So it can be a microservice. You can also, there are different approaches to this. You can rewrite the same code in a new language. You can create a custom domain-specific language, or as I said, you can create a microservice, or you can go with containerization. So basically, a problem we often face is the model works on our machine, but the model does not work on somebody else's machine. And why does that happen? Because the model works in a certain environment, and there are certain packages installed. There is a certain configuration of our machine due to which the model is working. So to ensure that our model is able to work on any machine, we need to containerize it. We need to replicate the settings of our machine around that model. And based on that, we have a container now, and we can then deploy our model and run it as a microservice. Then we can create a wrapper to get access to the functions or write an API. So in an online mode, the function is deployed to a cluster in AWS, and the key values are stored, and your model is ready to be used. So this is a simple deployment you can try. You can just make a simple KNN, for example, or SVM, whatever you're comfortable with, and then try to bind it in a Flask application. Using Docker, you try to containerize the application. If you want to know more about how you can do this, you can contact me. And then hosting the Docker container on an AWS instance, you will probably be using AWS EC2. That's the free instance, I think. You will be able to deploy your model, and that is how it will work. So you'll be able, and your model will be free to use for everybody. You'll have to open a port for the entire world, and from there, so everybody can use your model. So finally comes the stage of model scoring. So you will get recommendations based on your current model, and so this may be in multiple formats. This may be a specific value or recommended items, numeric values for time series and recommend regression models, and so on. So, and finally, you'll have to evaluate how well your model is performing. So that will be your model performance, and that's it. Thank you.